Well, kia ora and welcome to this little conversation. In this one here, I'm standing still on my island, of course. And if you look carefully over there, you can see some of the houses. Beautiful blue sky today. So we've actually had about 4 or 5 days of rain, maybe even more. So getting a wee bit wet. But in today's conversation, I wanted to sort of tie a few things together, particularly when we're talking about aspects of biculturalism. Now, I want you to think back on some of the conversations that we've had in the past and break that word biculturalism down. And we'll start with the second part of the word, that cultural. And you'll remember in our conversations we've talked about cultural constructs, we've talked about the way that culture is informed by narrative and discourse. Remember that? How there is a dominant discourse that feeds into ideas of, of common sense, of customs and practices. For example, the Christmas tree conversation that we had a while ago. That's a cultural custom that sometimes we don't even think about, that we don't interrogate. When we think about practices, I talked about which side of the road we drive on. And that didn't just, arrive by accident. Well, that may cause some accidents. But that didn't arrive by accident with the side of the road we drive on. It's a cultural construct. It came out of somewhere. And the way that we respond to those cultural customs and practices, interestingly enough, with driving on whichever side of the road we drive in, it changes our practice, changes what we do so that we actually get involved in processes without even thinking about it. The way that we look when we approach a road. If the traffic's coming from this way, in New Zealand I'll look this way. If I'm in Canada and I look this way and the traffic's coming from over here, I get in all sorts of trouble. But we do those things without even thinking because they become normative behaviour. That's just what we do. So when I'm talking about biculturalism, that idea of culture is informed by all of that stuff, by that, by narrative, by discourse, by dominant discourse, by normative behaviour, by behaviour that is enforced and reinforced politically, socially, and economically. Hopefully, some of these things will start making sense to you now. But within that, it informs what we do and what we do without question. And, that informs that concept of unconscious bias. Now, it might seem like something really, really simple to think about unconscious bias when we approach a road. Unconsciously, I look this way. Without even thinking about it, I'm not even conscious. I don't approach the road and think, which way am I going to look? I just look this way for the traffic. Now, that sort of form of unconscious bias doesn't work in Canada because when I look this way, the traffic's coming the other way. So I have to think about what I do when I approach something as simple as crossing the road. And I want you to just sort of mull that stuff around. But that's all that idea of culture. Sometimes from a Western perspective, from in Western countries, from that dominant discourse, and regardless of where we're from, there is always a dominant discourse. There's always one voice that informs the normatives that we do. So, usually when we approach things and think about culture from a dominant discourse perspective, from a Western perspective, we don't have to interrogate anything about our culture. We don't have to ask that question of why do I automatically look to this side when I come to a road? Why is a steering wheel on this side of the car? Why do men and women dress differently at times? Maybe not so relevant now, but what are all these cultural constructs, these cultural normalities? Why do I bring this tree inside at a certain time of the year? A trick with understanding culture is unpacking and critiquing and analysing our cultural constructs. Where does this stuff all come from? what is the meta-narrative that informs the cultural practice, that informs those things that we do every day. So when I'm talking about culture, about biculturalism, that idea of culture is that we are all imbued in and live within a habitus. Remember that word from before? We all live in habitus, in a place where we don't even have to question what happens within that place. Now, when I'm talking about biculturalism, I'm saying that word bi, that there's two of these things. There's two of these things. Our cultural constructs, the normatives that are informed by the social, political and the economic conditions that we live in, our cultural constructs that we take as normal, just as, common sense. And we put it alongside a different culture. And sometimes, once again, reflecting back on some stuff that we've talked about before, sometimes when we think about that different culture, we other that culture. It's the other culture. It's not us. It's not even affecting or touching us. It's the other. But there's this crossover point where these things do meet and do interact. And that is what I'm talking about when I talk about this concept of biculturalism. With two cultures meeting together and trying to make sense of each other. The sun coming out, some flies are coming out as well. Maybe because I haven't had a shower for a couple of days, but that's an aside. I'll see if I can cut that out later. Now, sometimes when we see that word bicultural, we see it with a hyphen in the middle. That hyphen indicates a distinct break. The two are separated.